There's a certain kind of fear people don't talk about. Not the fear of monsters hiding in the dark or demons clawing at the edges of a dream, but the fear of yourself. The fear of wanting something so badly that it ruins your life, your relationships, your sanity. Across entire civilizations, from ancient Persia to medieval Europe, people told stories about a being who lives inside that exact moment of weakness, a spirit who waits for the crack in your resolve, the trembling in your judgment, the heat you try to ignore. His name is Asmodeus. He isn't a simple tempter or a seductive trickster lurking in the shadows. He is the fire behind forbidden desire, the jealousy that twists love into poison, the obsession that makes a person throw everything away for one impossible craving. When ancient writers wanted to explain the kind of passion that destroys, they blamed it on him. When kings fell from grace, when marriages collapsed on their wedding night, when a heart broke violently enough to stain a family for generations, his name appeared in the stories. But what makes Asmodeus truly terrifying isn't the chaos he brings, it's how familiar it all feels. He doesn't appear with sulfur or horns, he appears when someone loses control. And his origins are far older and far more violent than most people realize. This is the story of Asmodeus, the demon of lust and desire. Long before he became the demon feared in medieval Europe, long before he appeared in Jewish folklore or the Book of Tobit, Asmodeus began as something far older, born in a world where gods and spirits were locked in a constant struggle over the human soul. His earliest known form comes from ancient Persia, in the religion of Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest surviving belief systems on Earth. Here, he wasn't called Asmodeus. He was Ishma-Daiva, a violent, wrathful spirit whose very name carried the meaning of fury, rage, or impulsive desire. Ishma wasn't subtle, and he wasn't seductive. He was the force that pushed people to lose control, the surge of anger that drowns out reason, the destructive urge that comes without warning, the violent passion that blinds judgment. He was a weapon of chaos. In Zoroastrian myth, the universe was split between two great powers, Ahura Mazda, the force of truth and order, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Ishma belonged to Angra Mainyu's side, serving as one of the devas who sought to corrupt humanity through passion, temptation, and rage. His role was clear: break patience, disrupt harmony, and turn desire into something dangerous. As Persian culture spread and interacted with the wider Near East, the legend of Ishma traveled with it, changing, absorbing new meanings, and merging with the fears and beliefs of other civilizations. By the time his name entered early Jewish tradition, he had already shifted into a more focused figure, Ashmedai. In the Talmud, Ashmedai is no longer a distant cosmic spirit. He walks among people, he talks, he tricks, he fights. Sometimes he comes across as monstrous and cruel, other times strangely human, unpredictable, and cunning, almost like a demon who understands human flaws a little too well. His anger becomes jealousy, his destructive passion becomes obsession, his violence becomes personal. This transformation is important. Asmodeus didn't just jump from one religion to another. He evolved with the people who feared him. Each culture reshaped him to reflect what they worried about most. But it isn't until the Book of Tobit, a Jewish text written somewhere between the 3rd and 2nd century BCE, that Asmodeus becomes fully recognizable as the demon we think of today. Here, his name appears in its Greek-influenced form, Asmodios or Asmodeus, and for the first time, he is tied directly to lust, jealousy, and the destruction of marriage. In the story, he kills 7 husbands in a row, not for power or territory or some grand cosmic plan, but because he was obsessed with a woman named Sarah. This was new. This was intimate. It was the moment Asmodeus became the demon of desire. Centuries later, medieval demonologists would go even further, elevating him to the rank of a prince of hell, the ruler over lust, obsession, and the collapse of self-control. They painted him as the mastermind behind adultery, temptation, and corrupted love. They filled grimoires with instructions on summoning him, usually paired with long warnings explaining why no one should ever try. There are also later stories that claim Asmodeus's origins began in heaven, but we'll touch on that in a later chapter. From Aishma the raging spirit, to Ashmedai the trickster, to Asmodeus, the prince of lust. His evolution is a reflection of humanity's oldest struggle, the battle between desire and discipline, between longing and ruin. He is the same demon wearing different masks, shaped by thousands of years of fear. And his appearance across cultures is just as unsettling as the stories told about him. Trying to pin down what Asmodeus actually looks like is like trying to define desire itself. Every culture describes him differently, yet every version feels like it's pointing at the same dangerous thing. His appearance shifts depending on the time, the place, and the fears of the people telling the story. But taken together, these descriptions paint a disturbing picture of a being who is both alluring and monstrous, human and inhuman, familiar and completely wrong. The earliest hints come from the Book of Tobit, and they're surprisingly subtle. Asmodeus never appears in full form. Instead, he lingers in the background like an invisible presence, a shadow clinging to Sarah's life, striking down anyone who tries to marry her. In this version, he's less a creature and more a force, something you can't see but can feel breathing down your neck. Jewish folklore takes him in a different direction. In the Talmud, Ashmedai appears almost human. Almost. He walks, drinks, eats, speaks, lies, and bargains. He can be captured. He can be tricked. But every story implies something off. An unsettling charisma mixed with unpredictable violence. He has the strength to overthrow kings, the cunning to manipulate wise men, and the temper of a being who was never truly meant to live among humans. He's not a beast here, he's a mirror with teeth. But medieval demonology is where Asmodeus becomes unmistakably monstrous. European texts, influenced by centuries of fear and folklore, transform him into one of the most striking demons in the entire hierarchy. They describe him with 3 heads, one of a man, handsome but twisted with fury, one of a ram, symbolizing raw lust and stubbornness, one of a bull, representing brute strength and violent desire. Each head whispers a different temptation, anger, obsession, jealousy, pleasure. Together they make him unpredictable, chaotic, and impossible to ignore. From the waist down, his body morphs into something far more sinister. Some grimoires give him a serpent's tail, coiled and restless. Others say his legs are those of a rooster or dragon, symbols of aggression, virility, and fire. He often wears a crown, not as decoration, but as a reminder that in the infernal hierarchy, Asmodeus is royalty, a ruler, a prince. Many medieval artists show him riding a dragon, gripping a spear or banner, leading armies of temptation and ruin. And sometimes, almost ironically, he is portrayed as incredibly handsome, because lust itself rarely arrives looking like a monster. It comes dressed in whatever form you want most. Across civilizations, one pattern repeats. Asmodeus is always a blend of beauty and horror. A being who can look like a man one moment and a nightmare the next. A creature who shifts shape not to deceive, but because his domain is fluid, adaptable, and deeply human. He is the embodiment of temptation, wearing whatever skin works best. Asmodeus isn't the demon of simple temptation. He isn't the whisper in someone's ear telling them to chase pleasure for pleasure's sake. His nature is far more volatile, far more personal, and far more destructive. Every culture that wrote about him, Persian, Jewish, Christian, medieval European, describes the same underlying truth. Asmodeus is the point where desire stops being human and becomes something dangerous. From his earliest form as Aishma, the Persian spirit of wrath and impulsive passion, Asmodeus inherited a temperament shaped by emotion rather than reason. Aishma was known for violent urges and sudden impulses, acts committed without thinking, without restraint. That raw, unfiltered emotional energy follows Asmodeus everywhere he appears in later traditions. In Jewish folklore, as Ashmedai, he becomes intelligent, unpredictable, and unsettlingly human-like. One moment he is cunning and calculated, outsmarting kings and sages. The next he is spiteful and explosive, driven by jealousy or wounded pride. His logic isn't random. He behaves according to a kind of emotional intelligence that is both profound and dangerous. He understands human weakness because he embodies one of humanity's deepest weaknesses: the inability to control what the heart wants. This emotional volatility is exactly why he becomes known as the breaker of marriages. Not because he seduces spouses or destroys relationships with theatrical demonic acts, but because he manipulates the fragile, invisible threads that hold people together. Folklore across the Near East and medieval Europe paints him as a presence that quietly infiltrates the homes of couples. He doesn't tear relationships apart in one dramatic blow. He works slowly, almost surgically. A small insecurity becomes a recurring worry. A short argument becomes a lingering wound. Doubt becomes suspicion, and suspicion becomes jealousy. Storytellers described him as the demon who inflames whatever was already there: resentment, loneliness, or unspoken fears, and pushes it just far enough to fracture trust. He doesn't create problems, he amplifies them. In some tales, Asmodeus whispers thoughts to husbands and wives separately, encouraging each to see the worst in the other. In others, he stirs petty conflicts at wedding feasts or nudges newlyweds into emotional turmoil. The theme is always the same. Asmodeus targets bonds that are already unsteady. He tests relationships built on vanity, pride, or shallow attraction. And when those foundations crack, he widens the fracture until the bond collapses under its own weight. Despite all of this, his personality isn't mindless chaos. Many legends emphasize his pride, the arrogance of a demon who considers himself royalty and reacts with fury when that pride is wounded. He can be respectful toward those he deems worthy, especially those whose discipline or intelligence impress him. But when challenged by someone weak-willed or emotionally fragile, he treats them as playthings, bending their impulses until they self-destruct. He doesn't force people to ruin themselves. He simply leans on the part of them already tipping toward the edge. Asmodeus represents the darker side of desire, not the moment you want something, but the moment you can't let go of that want. He is fixation instead of affection, jealousy instead of devotion, impulse instead of intention. He is desire when it becomes its own form of destruction. And once you understand how he behaves, his abilities and the ways he uses them become even more unnerving. Hey everyone, before we continue, I've got some exciting news. My weekly video is now live on my new channel, Index Unknown. That's where I dive into the hidden side of history, the secrets, the theories, the conspiracies, the things they don't want you to know. The latest upload dives into the Majestic 12, the alleged secret group of scientists, military leaders, and government officials tasked with covering up UFO evidence after Roswell. Were they real operatives protecting national security, or the invention of a Cold War disinformation campaign? The link's below if you're interested. Check it out after this video. We've already covered his manipulation of human emotions and desires, but how does he do it? Many traditions say Asmodeus works through dreams, slipping into the mind when defenses are weakest. In dreams, emotions blend with fear and memory, and a whisper can feel like revelation. Legends describe people waking from a single dream changed, pursuing desires they once rejected, or fearing betrayals that never existed. Asmodeus's influence in dreams rarely feels supernatural. It feels personal, like something that just came to mind. He is also a shapeshifter, appearing in forms that allow him access to someone's emotional defenses. Sometimes he appears as a comforting stranger, sometimes as someone familiar, and sometimes as something entirely symbolic. His disguises are not about deception, they're about resonance. He becomes whatever form a person is most vulnerable to. Older Zoroastrian influences hint at a more direct kind of power, flashes of brutal strength and destructive rage. While most stories focus on subtlety, Asmodeus is capable of physical force when provoked or cornered. His ability to flee across great distances, as seen in the Book of Tobit, implies supernatural speed or teleportation. His rank in medieval demonology suggests command over legions, reinforcing his status as a prince rather than a common spirit. This is where his connection to ritual magic becomes important. Medieval grimoires consistently describe Asmodeus as a demon who is extraordinarily difficult to summon, control, or bargain with. Conjurers approached him not for romance, but for influence, insight into human desires, leverage over rivals, or knowledge of hidden weaknesses. Ritual manuals warn that he answers questions indirectly, distorting truths through charm or cleverness. Even experienced magicians risked being misled, manipulated, or psychologically broken if they approached him without absolute discipline. He doesn't overpower summoners physically, he breaks their resolve. And yet, even Asmodeus has limitations. The Book of Tobit reveals his vulnerability to purifying smoke, suggesting that clarity, discipline, and spiritual cleansing can weaken his influence. Similarly, the legends of Solomon show that he can be bound or commanded, not through brute power, but through unwavering will and unshakable authority. This is the paradox of Asmodeus's abilities. He is one of the most dangerous demons because he does not need to force anything. He coaxes, he nudges, he magnifies. By the time his victim realizes something is wrong, the damage is already done, because the thoughts he used were their own from the beginning. And when his abilities escalate into action, when jealousy turns deadly or obsession becomes violent, his presence erupts into full view. If there's one story that defines Asmodeus, one tale that carved his name into the foundations of demonology, it's the one found in the Book of Tobit. This is where he stops being a distant spirit of fury and becomes the demon of jealousy, obsession, and destructive desire that later centuries feared so deeply. And it all begins with a woman who never wanted any of this. Her name is Sarah. She lived in the city of Ecbatana, carrying a burden that no one could explain and no one dared to face directly. Sarah had been engaged 7 different times, 7 men had loved her, 7 men had married her, and 7 men had died on their wedding night. Not from illness, not from poison, not from murder. They collapsed before the marriage could be consummated, their bodies broken by something no human hand had touched. The people around her whispered. They blamed her. Some said she was cursed, others said she was dangerous, and the weight of that blame, the shame, the grief, drove her to the edge of despair. One night, overwhelmed and exhausted, Sarah considered taking her own life just to escape the cruelty that followed her every step. But what no one understood, not her family, not her servants, not even Sarah herself, was that she wasn't the curse. She was the obsession. Asmodeus had fallen in love with her. The text doesn't describe his jealousy the way later writers would. It doesn't indulge in theatrics or seductive imagery. It simply states a truth that's far more chilling. Asmodeus wanted Sarah for himself, and anyone who dared to approach her was marked for death. His affection wasn't romantic, it wasn't tender, it was ownership disguised as passion, the kind of desire that doesn't lift you up, it locks you in. And that's when Tobiah enters the story. He's young, inexperienced, and traveling on a journey guided by a disguised archangel, Raphael. When Tobiah learns about Sarah's past, he doesn't turn away in fear. Instead, he agrees to marry her, trusting Raphael's guidance even though no man before him had survived their wedding night. What happens next is one of the most iconic moments in demonology. Following Raphael's instructions, Tobiah gathers the organs of a fish they had caught along the way, the heart and liver. When he and Sarah enter the bridal chamber, Tobiah burns them on incense. The smell fills the room, sharp and bitter, and something in that scent, something symbolic of purification, cleansing, and divine intervention, forces Asmodeus out of hiding. The demon flees, not across the room, not into the night, but across the desert, all the way to Egypt, driven out by a ritual meant to break the grip of obsessive desire. Raphael pursues him, binds him, and leaves him defeated. It is the first, and one of the only, recorded times in ancient literature where Asmodeus is fully overcome. And in the silence that follows, something incredible happens. Sarah wakes up the next morning beside a living husband for the first time in her life. The story of Sarah and Tobiah is often framed as a simple tale of righteousness defeating evil, but underneath that surface is something deeper. The demon is not beaten by violence or heroism. He's defeated by clarity, by ritual, by the removal of the hidden and the unspoken. Sarah's suffering isn't healed by fear. It's healed by understanding and confronting the force that haunted her. For Asmodeus, this story marks the moment when his identity becomes crystallized. He is the demon who destroys marriages, the demon who twists love into something deadly, the demon whose desire is so consuming that he would rather kill than let someone else have what he covets. And this theme, jealousy, obsession, fixation, carries forward into his next major appearance. A story not of love, but of power. Not of weddings, but of kings. If the Book of Tobit shows Asmodeus as a demon driven by obsession, the legends of King Solomon reveal another side of him, his intelligence, his pride, and the dangerous blend of rage and cunning that make him far more than a one-dimensional spirit of lust. Unlike the story of Sarah, this tale doesn't begin with love or marriage. It begins with a king who wanted absolute control. According to ancient Jewish tradition, King Solomon wasn't just the ruler of Israel. He was a man gifted with divine wisdom, capable of understanding the nature of angels and demons alike. He was building the first temple, a project so massive and sacred that ordinary labor wouldn't be enough. The legends claim that Solomon sought supernatural help, spirits who could shape stone, cut materials, and accomplish tasks no human could. But to command demons, he needed to capture them. And one demon in particular stood out as the most dangerous prize: Asmodeus. Solomon's method was clever. He didn't confront the demon directly. He knew better than to challenge a prince of lust head-on. Instead, he sent one of his trusted servants, the Israelite hero Benaiah ben Jehoiada, armed with a magical chain engraved with the divine name and a ring with God's seal upon it. These were not weapons of violence. They were tools of authority, symbols that even demons recognized. Benaiah found Asmodeus at a well in the wilderness, doing something strangely mundane, drinking water. But Asmodeus, cautious and perceptive, sensed the danger. Every time Benaiah tried to trap him, Asmodeus slipped away or outsmarted him. It wasn't until Benaiah tricked him into thirst, subtly diverting the water, drying the well, and making the demon desperate, that Asmodeus finally lowered his guard. In that single moment of weakness, Benaiah struck. He bound Asmodeus with the enchanted chain, sealed him with the ring, and dragged him back to Jerusalem. And Solomon put him to work. In these legends, the mighty prince of lust becomes an unwilling laborer. Forced to help build the temple he would have never approached willingly, Asmodeus resisted, argued, and mocked the king. But the divine seal held him like a leash. He moved massive stones, revealed secrets, and even imparted knowledge, often bitterly, sometimes sarcastically, but always with the awareness that he was being used by a mortal king. This dynamic, Solomon holding power over Asmodeus, fills the story with tension. The king saw himself as wise enough to command demons. Asmodeus saw himself as a prisoner waiting for the smallest crack in his chains. And eventually, he got one. The legends split into a handful of versions, but they all point to the same dramatic moment. Solomon becomes overconfident, too trusting in his authority, too sure that Asmodeus is contained. Whether through trickery, persuasion, or a calculated moment of cunning, Asmodeus manages to slip the ring from Solomon's hand and take it for himself. For a brief, terrifying time, Asmodeus becomes king. Some stories say he cast Solomon out into the desert, replacing him on the throne and ruling in his form. Others say he flung Solomon hundreds of miles away, forcing him to wander as a beggar while Asmodeus sat on the throne of Israel. Eventually, Solomon regains his ring, his throne, and his life, but the message of the legend stays the same. Even the wisest man in the world underestimated Asmodeus. This story adds a new layer to the demon's character. In Tobit, he's driven by passion. Here, he's driven by pride, strategy, and a desire to prove he can't be tamed. He isn't just a creature of lust. He's a being who understands authority, power, and humiliation all too well. For a figure who's been around for nearly 3,000 years, it's no surprise that Asmodeus has gathered layers of confusion, pop culture rewrites, and outright contradictions. His identity has shifted from culture to culture, and somewhere along the way, a lot of false assumptions stuck. Clearing them up doesn't just fix the mythology, it reveals a clearer picture of who he actually is and why ancient societies feared him so intensely. The first misconception is one of the most common. Asmodeus is not Satan. He's not Lucifer, he's not the devil, and he's not the ruler of all hell. Demonology texts consistently rank him as a prince, yes, but not the ultimate antagonist. His domain is specific, lust twisted into obsession, and while that makes him dangerous, it doesn't make him the leader of infernal forces. Medieval writers placed him high in the hierarchy, but never at the top. Another widespread mistake is the idea that Asmodeus is a fallen angel. In the Book of Tobit, he isn't described as angelic at all. He simply exists. He acts, intervenes, and is driven out, but nothing in the text suggests he fell from heaven. His origins trace back to ancient Persian spirits, not to the rebellious angels of Christian lore. The fallen angel identity came centuries later, largely from European demonologists, trying to force every major demon into the same theological mold. A third misconception is the belief that Asmodeus is solely a sexual seducer, a stereotype popularized by fiction and even some occult manuals. While lust is certainly tied to his nature, the older stories consistently portray him as something more complex. He isn't a tempter who strolls around offering pleasure, he's the consequence of desire taken too far. He represents obsession, jealousy, rage, and emotional destruction, not seduction. Lust is the doorway, not the destination. There's also the idea that he always appears monstrous, horns, wings, multiple heads, but this comes mostly from medieval illustrations meant to shock or instruct. Many earlier stories describe him as almost human or even invisible. The monstrous imagery is symbolic, meant to express the ugliness of corrupted desire, not literal biological detail. Finally, perhaps the most subtle misunderstanding is this. Asmodeus does not hate all marriages. He hates unstable ones. He hates vows made for the wrong reasons. He hates unions built on vanity, insecurity, or dishonesty, because these are the kinds of relationships he can break with ease. In some obscure traditions, he only interferes where the foundation is already weak, feeding on the flaws already there rather than creating new ones. Misconceptions flatten him into a caricature. The real Asmodeus, the one who appears in ancient myth, early scripture, and medieval ritual, is far more unsettling. He's not horrifying because of horns or wings or dramatic seductions. He's horrifying because his domain is painfully human, wanting something so intensely that it destroys you. And that's why his legend never faded.